So like me being able to pick out my own book, that sounds really nice. Again, my sister, if you're listening, I'm sorry.
Welcome to Keep It Fictional, a weekly podcast for book lovers by book lovers. Build your to-be-read list with Sadie, Liz, Virginia, Fiona, and Corene from the Port Moody Public Library. Warning, this podcast contains strong opinions and may cause an increase in your library holds list.
Welcome back to another episode of Keep It Fictional, a book podcast from the Port Moody Public Library. I'm your host, Emma, and I'm joined today by my book friends, Virginia, Sadie, and Corene. If you are anything like me, then you have a long and ever-growing TBR that's filled with recommendations you've received from friends or family or librarians over the years. For me personally, one of the greatest gifts that I can receive is a book recommendation from a friend who really knows my taste, or a recommendation to read a favorite book of someone that I really care about. I often tell people that for gift exchanges, I like to receive the other person's favorite book. And this has resulted in a growing collection of other books that other people really love that I just have not had the time to read yet. So in the spirit of gift giving and also blasting through that long TBR, today's theme is a book that you have been gifted. My chosen book is one that was gifted to me for Christmas last year, and I really look forward to seeing what books my book friends have that have been given to them by those that are close to them, and whether or not those friends actually know what our reading tastes are. So first, I think we'll begin with Sadie. What book have you been gifted, and who gave it to you?
So, and I'm just going to start with a story that one of my friends, when they got married, they did not ask for like a standard registry gift list. What they said is that we will take donations to our honeymoon fund, to our new house fund, and then we would like everybody to gift us your favorite book, which I thought was a really lovely idea, which I completely forgot about for my wedding. But that's okay. Anyone else who's getting married in the future, maybe you can use it. So I actually get gifted books quite often. Similar to Emma, I get books for Christmas. I'll get books for my birthday. Me and my husband for quite a while, we would do a birthday book where we would go to the store together and we'd get to pick out our own book for our birthday. It stopped a little bit after having Evie just because we don't go to the store that much anymore. But it is something that was always very special to me and something that I think that as Evie gets older, we will continue with her as well. She gets to go and pick out her own book for her birthday. So I had a lot of books to pick from for this episode. And I'd planned to read one that I had gotten this past Christmas. But unfortunately, after reading the book I had selected, I did not feel that I could attach my recommendation to it. So the book that I was going to read is The Unfortunate Side Effects of Heartbreak and Magic. It was described as practical magic meets Gilmore Girls, which sounds like the perfect combination. But as I was reading it, I realized that I don't know if I would want to read Gilmore Girls. I don't know if there's enough there that I would want to actually read. And because I feel like so much of it is in the acting and the banter and right? So anyway, so as I was reading this book and getting more and more bored with my life, I decided that I was going to switch gears. And so I chose a book that I was given a few years ago for Christmas by my husband, Tyler, that I didn't get around to reading until a couple months ago. And that is The Invisible Life of Addie, LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Now, both me and Al, trying to think if anyone else has mentioned V.E. Schwab on the podcast. Maybe it's just the two of us. We've definitely talked about them in the past, mainly focusing on her Shades of Magic and her villain series. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is one of her standalone books, and it came out in 2020. And it tells the story, not surprisingly, of Addie. New York City, 2014. Addie wakes up in Toby's bed. Toby is still asleep beside her. Ensuring she doesn't wake him, Addie sneaks out of bed and into the living room. Now, she's been here before, many times, so she knows her way. She walks to the kitchen to make a cup of her favorite tea. She asked Toby to buy it months ago on a late night trip to the grocery store, though he doesn't remember. They never remember. But the tin of loose leaf Ceylon and silk packets are still tucked away in the back of a cupboard. Addie knows she should leave, knows that it will be so much harder if she stays. The look of confusion on Toby's face, struggling to remember not just her name, Jess, she called herself this time, but her. The awkward acceptance that he must have been much drunker than he realized last night. And the inevitable goodbye from two people who have only just met. Except they haven't just met. Addie and Toby have been meeting night after night now for weeks. They always have a connection. They're always drawn to each other. And each time they meet, they spend a wonderful, music-filled night together before blissfully falling asleep in each other's arms. And every morning, when Toby wakes up, he doesn't remember a thing. Addie can't blame him. It's not his fault. This is just Addie's life, and has been for the past 300 years. She has been cursed to be forgotten. Adeline LaRue was born in the year 1691. In the small French village of Vion. In 1714, she still lives there with her mother and her father. She lives a quiet life, hardly ever leaving her village, at least not since her mother deemed it inappropriate for her father to take her with him on his trips into town. But Adeline has always dreamed of more, dreamed of adventure, dreamed of going to visit Paris and exploring the world. Adeline's dreams, however, are thoroughly dashed when she is betrothed to Roger, a widower from her village who is in need of a new wife to care for his children. But Adeline doesn't want to care for his children. She doesn't want to care for any children or be married to someone who will expect her to stay by his side and do what he says for the rest of her life. So in an act of desperation, she flees. Still wearing her wedding dress, she runs into the woods behind her house, praying to the old gods for some way out of this. But Adeline doesn't realize that as she's pleading for someone to answer, the sun has slipped below the horizon. Now, she knows to never pray to the gods who answer after dark. Her neighbor Estelle, who told her about the old gods, was always very clear about this. And so Adeline has always been very, very careful. However, as a dark figure made of blackness and smoke appears in front of her, she knows that she has made a mistake. But he is here. He answered her when no one else did. And so she breathlessly makes her request. Freedom, more time to live, a life that is truly her own. Nothing is free. And the dark figure makes it clear that he won't be accepting a bargain if he too cannot benefit. Her soul, he says. Whenever she has lived the life she wishes to live, he wants her soul. Deal, Adeline breathes. Adeline doesn't realize the full extent of her mistake until she wakes the next morning in the woods and makes her way home, only to have her mother scream in her face and her father chase her away. Neither recognizes her. We have no daughter, they say. We never have. Even Estelle, who Adeline felt closer to than her own parents, doesn't recognize her, thinking her an evil spirit. This happens again and again with the people who have known Adeline her entire life. And so for the first time, she leaves Vion without plans of returning. Back in 2014, after her awkward goodbye with Toby, Addie decides to wander the city for a while. She eventually finds herself in a used bookstore, The Last Word. She's never been here before. That's one of the things she loves about New York. There's always somewhere new. She picks up a copy of the Iliad in Greek and decides to take it. Stealing has never really been an issue for Addie. In fact, with everyone forgetting her the second she's out of their sight, it makes it hard to hold down a job. So stealing is the only way for her to acquire anything, be it food, clothing, or just a good read. Just as she slips out the door, she hears the young man at the desk yell after her. She quickly moves beyond the door and continues on her way. He won't remember once the door closes anyways. She spends the day reading and exploring the city some more, and the next day she returns to The Last Word to return the book and get another. However, she is shocked when the young man from the day before immediately accuses her of stealing, and even more shocked when he says the three words she never thought she'd hear again. I remember you. Now, Despite the fact that he's currently accusing her of stealing, Addie knows that she needs to learn more about him and spend more time with him. So she invites him to get a drink later to make up for, the small theft. And when the young man, Henry Strauss, walks into the cafe later that day, for the first time in 300 years, Addie experiences recognition. And it is the most amazing thing she has ever felt. The book switches back and forth between the present day of 2014 and scenes from the past 300 years of Addie's life. In the present, we learn more about Henry Strauss, getting chapters from his perspective and slowly getting more info on why he, over anyone else, is able to remember Addie. In the past, we see Adelaine's journey from Vion to Paris to Berlin and 100 other cities. We finally meet the darkness, or Luke, as Addie calls him, as he appears before her on the anniversary of their deal, seeing each time if she is ready to give up her life and her soul. He tries cruelty and mockery, and then just the promise of being remembered, and finally, seduction. Some tactics Addie sees through immediately. Some she almost falls for, and some she gives her life to for decades. However, in the end, Addie still dreams of freedom, a life where she is not bound to anyone, a life that is truly her own. Full disclosure, I tried reading this book when I first got it, and I could not get into it. I tried a few different times, and I could not get into it. Don't know if it was just where I was at the time, but for some reason, I picked it up. I read the first few pages, and I put it down because I was not into it. So this time, when I decided to go back to it, I went with the audiobook instead, which is narrated by Julia Whelan, and it was definitely the right decision. I think that this time, just kind of being drawn in by the voice and by the acting was able to kind of get me into the story really easily. And I ended up really, really enjoying it. I've always enjoyed a really good Faustian deal kind of trope ever since I performed scenes from Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe in my high school acting class. I was Mephistopheles. And so I enjoyed the premise. I enjoyed the idea of kind of like making a deal with the devil. I think that Schwab was able to give the story a bit of a new lens by adding the element of kind of being forgotten and what that means to a person. She looked a lot at if somebody does not make a visible mark on the world, kind of what does that mean? And how do people make a mark when they're not able to publicly? I think that with this story, she was able to bring into focus the thousands and thousands of women who did not leave a single trace throughout history. The thousands who are kind of only known by association to their fathers, to their brothers, to their husbands. And much like Addie, I think that they have all made much more of a mark than we will ever know, whether it's made public or not. I think that writing under a male pseudonym, a piece of music that's composed and taught to a sibling, a male sibling, so that they can be performed, a scientific idea that might be claimed by a partner, a husband, even just an idea or caring for a child or a person, which they will never get recognition for. And I think that was kind of really brought to light with Addie. And she finds ways, even throughout her whole life, these whole 300 years, where she's not allowed to leave a trace. She's not allowed to even write or say her name. She's able to figure out how to leave a mark, how to infiltrate people's life. And so with the character of Toby, she slowly teaches him a song every single time she sees him. They write a song together. And eventually he just remembers it as part of a dream, but he writes this song and he performs this song. And so she finds ways like that where she's able to kind of make her mark on the world, even if she's not able to publicly. I think what I really liked about Addie's character, I think one of my favorite parts of her character is that even 300 years later, after every single person forgets her, she would still make the same deal. She would still make the same decision because it meant that she got to live for herself. She got to make her own choices. She got to make her own life. I'd say the book is a little slow moving at times, and I found myself enjoying the present day story a lot more than the snippets from the past, just because they were progressing the story a bit more. The snippets, it kind of explained how Addie got to where she was, but it wasn't moving the story along at all. So that's why I think I enjoyed the present day a little bit more. But I think that there are some reveals that were a little bit easy to figure out, but that didn't make it any less enjoyable to read. So all in all, I would say that I really enjoyed this book. If you do like kind of a present day / historical kind of alternating story, This is a really good one if you like a good Faustian deal, or if you have enjoyed other books by V.E. Schwab in the past, then I would definitely recommend The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
Awesome. Thank you, Sadie. I'm definitely going to steal the books for a wedding idea. That's pretty genius. I also like the going shopping for a book on your birthday. That's really nice. Because I feel like my sister's not the best at choosing books. And I'm sorry, Molly, if you're listening to the episode, I apologize. But I feel like she doesn't fully know what my taste is. So, like, me being able to pick out my own book, that sounds really nice. Again, my sister, if you're listening, I'm sorry. But I will share next. So my book was actually gifted to me by my partner last Christmas. It's one of her favorite books that she's ever read. And although we don't always have the same reading tastes, she was correct in thinking that I would also like this one. There's enough overlap in our taste that she kind of knew that this would be a good book for me. And it's quite close to home for me because it's an author that I really like and it takes place in a city that I've lived in. So it's pretty easy to assume that this was going to be an Emma book. But my partner reads a lot of romance, which is not quite my thing. But this book is totally up my alley. It's a paranormal, magical realism with a little touch of horror. And it's about a small independent bookstore that's being haunted by its most annoying customer from November 2019 to November 2020. My partner says that she read this book at exactly the right time in her life, since it takes place in 2019 and 2020. It covers the early months of the pandemic, and it's based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I've lived for 5 years. So it also covers the protests that took over following the murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department. So it's dark in a lot of different aspects. It's got this ghost story. It talks about the pandemic anxiety and the isolation. And then obviously the protests where all this violence kind of comes into the city. But before the pandemic begins, the book is set up more as a paranormal mystery and a ghost story. So that's kind of how it starts out. So Flora died on All Souls Day in November 2019, the day when the border between the worlds of the living and the dead is the most permeable. And since her soul hasn't fully passed on, she haunts the independent bookstore that she frequented in her lifetime, much to the dismay of Tuki, one of the store's employees. Tuki has always had a knack for sales and manipulation, something that got her in more than her fair share of trouble in her youth. In the beginning chapters of the book, we kind of jump back into Tuki's backstory, and she narrates an incident years prior that resulted in her incarceration. Years prior in northeastern Minnesota, Tuki is consoling her close friend and also her crush, Danae, who is in a state of hysterical grief when she learns that her lover, Budgie, has suddenly died. I also realized that I never said the title of the book. This is The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. I just kind of jumped into the plot here. But this book is The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, who I've talked about on the pod before. She's a lovely Minneapolis-based author, someone I read a lot in college and then into my adulthood. But yeah, that's the book title. I'll go back to the plot then. So yeah, we're years prior. Budgie has suddenly died. Danae is in hysterical grief because Budgie was her lover, but she wasn't Budgie's wife. Budgie lived with his wife, Mara, in Wisconsin. He was cheating on Mara with Danae, and Danae insists that she deserves to have Budgie's body more than Mara does. So Danae proposes an idea to Tuki. Given Tuki's knack for lying and manipulation, Tuki will pose as an employee of a natural burial service, and she'll go and collect Budgie's body to bring it back to Danae. In return, Danae will give Tuki all of her recent casino wins, which adds up to $26,000. So Tuki immediately agrees. She goes through with it, only to be immediately arrested by tribal police hours after the body snatching, when she's having a celebratory drink in a bar following her successful heist. Turns out that Mara and Danae had actually set her up. They used Tuki and Budgie's corpse to smuggle drugs across the Wisconsin-Minnesota border, and now Tuki is being charged in federal court for her crime. She gets 60 years, but she's released after only serving 10 of those years, thanks to the diligent work of her tribal attorney and the fact that Danae and Mara eventually confessed to setting her up. So now Tuki's out of prison. She survived those 10 years in prison by reading what she describes as with murderous attention. And now that she's released, Tuki has to reconcile with how the world has rapidly changed from 2005 to 2015. The city has grown, everybody has a cell phone now, and Tuki needs to get a job. So with her skills in sales and her love of books, She finds a job at an indigenous bookstore in a quiet residential neighborhood on the west side of Minneapolis. The real-life store Birch Bark Books, owned by the author Louise Erdrich. So Tukey gets this job. She also reconnects with an old friend from her youth. He's actually the tribal police officer who arrested her, named Pollux, and the two of them end up getting married. We jump forward to 2019, and the bookstore, and especially Tukey, is being haunted by Flora's ghost, who cannot seem to pass on. Although Flora's presence in the bookstore is nearly constant, she only seems to be haunting Tukey, and the other employees go about their days, their work days, without really noticing her. She always returns to her favorite section, the fiction section, and she drops choice books on the ground, spooking Tukey with her rustling and her disruptions. Tukey doesn't tell her coworkers or the bookstore owner, who is the author, Louise Erdrich, about Flora's ghost. She fears that they won't believe her and that her memories and her experiences from her prison years already make her feel kind of neurotic on edge. So now with this ghost haunting her, she's even more on edge. Flora's daughter, Kateri, visits the bookstore and gives Tukey a book from her late mother's vast collection, a dense first edition of a captivity narrative by a Native woman from the 1880s called The Sentence. It's actually the book that was splayed out next to Flora when they found her after she had died. It's the last book that she had ever read. When Tukey eventually musters the courage to try to read this very, very dense book, which its language is really hard for her to parse, she finds the writing way too dense and isn't able to make any sense of it. She skips ahead to the page that Flora ended on, right before she passed, and as she's trying to decipher the dense prose, she blacks out and sees her body laying on her own bed from all different angles around her room. As soon as she can move her body again, she closes the book, and Tukey's convinced that this book, and this page in particular, is what killed Flora. Tukey tries to burn the book after this terrifying incident, and she fails. The book won't burn. So instead, she buries it in her backyard. Every time she hears or senses Flora in the store, she begs her to leave her alone. But Flora continues to haunt her, slamming books on the floor in frustration and leaving pages wide open, and she even places her hand on Tukey's when she goes to turn the lights off at the end of one of her night shifts. The final straw for Tukey is when she hears Flora's raspy voice demand, "Let me in," and Tukey is now fully convinced that Flora is trying to possess her. She finally confides in her coworkers and in Pollux, her husband, who believes in spirits but doesn't believe in ghosts. Her colleagues, Penn and Asuma, a millennial and a Gen Z who are both very spiritual and knowledgeable in Ojibwe and Dakota ways of knowing, as well as Jackie, the bookstore manager and her former teacher, help Tukey. They believe her immediately, and they help her run through ways that she can safely try to ward off Flora's ghost. Even when she tells the bookstore owner, Louise, about Flora and the sentence and the book, Louise doesn't question her story for a moment. Louise even says, "I wish I could write a sentence that could kill," which is pretty funny. Now with the support of her colleagues and her husband, Tukey feels safer at work despite Flora's disconcerting presence. And her home life with Pollux and his niece's newborn baby is comfortable and content. And Tukey finally feels like, okay, she can deal with this haunting. She can cope through it now that she's got a solid support system with her. And then March 2020 rolls around, and obviously everything changes. Tukey and her colleagues must now navigate working in an already failing bookstore amidst a global pandemic. They make makeshift masks, they apply for grants for money to keep the store open, and when booksellers are granted essential worker status in Minnesota, they're able to do curbside orders to stay afloat. Only 2 months after lockdown begins, on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd is murdered by Minneapolis police outside of Cub Foods in South Minneapolis. Erdrich's description of the grief felt by Minneapolitans and the protests and the riots that happened following Floyd's murder and the intense police presence in the city, and especially the growing anxiety in citizens as they're trying to both navigate the COVID pandemic as well as this increasing police and military presence, is absorbing and also very, very terrifying. You can feel that this is someone who was on the ground, who knew people who were on the ground, who very accurately and intimately can tell you what it was like in Minneapolis at this time. I lived in Minneapolis for 5 years, but I left in summer 2019. So I wasn't there for the protests, but my friends were. And I was hearing people watching banks burning down. One of my friends was on the highway when a semi-truck tried to drive through protesters. So it's quite terrifying, and you can feel that very, very intimately as you're reading what it's like in this book. You see protesters burn down the 3rd Police Precinct, and Erdrich narrates that as Asima and Pollock's niece are actually there when it happens. The National Guard was sent into the streets, and police were shooting protesters and journalists with rubber bullets. And all of these things are things that Erdrich narrates in the book from the perspectives of these characters that were there. But they're also things that like we remember seeing on the news. And I mean, I remember hearing from my friends when they happened. So it's quite terrifying, but it's really, really interesting to see it from firsthand witnesses. So the book is really fascinating in that it begins as a ghost story, but it becomes one that's about trying to solve a paranormal mystery while at the same time trying to understand all of these things that are happening in Minneapolis in one short year. It's a year of grief, there's isolation of the pandemic, and furious reckoning following George Floyd's murder. I really liked the book. I've been an Erdrich fan for a really long time, and this book was probably my favorite of hers that I've read. It was a bit more accessible and contemporary than Antelope Woman that I've talked about on the pod before, and also less dark and depressing than The Roundhouse. And it's weird to say that this book was less dark and depressing, but it truly was. And it still was a really engaging and absorbing magical realism, which obviously you guys know I love. Genre-wise, this book has a lot of things that I usually go for. It's got ghosts, it's got the paranormal, a little bit of mythology, indigenous folklore, and storytelling, a little bit of grief, a little bit of darkness, but also quite a lot of humor and heart to it. At first, I was really enjoying the silly little Minneapolis shout-outs. Obviously, they work at Birch Bark Books, a real bookstore. They go to the Lake de Makaska. They talk about a store called Midwest Mountaineering that was like just off of my college campus. They go to restaurants on each street and dive bars on Hennepin Avenue. So those little tidbits I really enjoyed as someone who's lived in Minneapolis before. And I also really liked that Erdrich herself was a character. It reminded me a lot of like the metafiction aspects of Kurt Vonnegut's writing. He's one of my favorite authors. So that was a really fun aspect of the book as well. But as it went on, I appreciated it more and more for how intimately and accurately it portrayed Minneapolitans and their resistance and their resilience through this very tumultuous period of time. These are people who endured an insurmountable trauma and found solidarity in a time of anxiety and isolation. So I really loved this book because I like ghost stories and hauntings and magical realism and folklore, but I also really love Minneapolis and its people. And I think it's important that people can see what it was like in the city in 2020 from a true and proud Twin Cities resident. And there's nobody I trust more than Louise Erdrich to do that. So I would recommend this book, of course, if you like Louise Erdrich, but also if you liked books like Bad Cree, other Indigenous paranormal fictions, if you like metafiction, if you like books where the characters themselves are really avid readers. As a bookstore employee, Tukey gives plenty of book recommendations throughout it. And the book actually includes Tukey's reading list at the end. So if you want to just look at that, you're obviously welcome to. Also, if you want to learn more about the Minneapolis uprising in 2020 and how the people on the streets were feeling and grieving during that time, then I think this book is required reading. So if any of that appeals to you and you're not afraid of things that are a little dark and tragic, then I definitely recommend you check out The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. And I think before we hear from our next book friend, we'll jump to our existential question. So today's question is, what makes a great gift?
As I said, when you kind of like introduced this question to us before we started recording, this is a question that haunts me. This is genuinely a question that gives me existential dread. I think a lot of people feel a lot of pressure, especially when you kind of know a person well, to give them quote unquote, like the perfect gift that says like, I know you, I recognize you, I see this for you. And so I have so much angst around this, like genuine angst, that for most people, I just straight up ask them, what do you want? And then I do that because there is no like perfect gift. There is no great gift. So long as someone kind of like, it's from the heart, then it's a good gift. But it's so funny that I think it was you, Emma, when someone gives you something and you're like, really? You saw this and you thought of Me.
That does kind of sound like me. Like I said earlier, like all apologies to my sister if she's listening, but like she doesn't fully know what my taste is. So she'll be like, you should totally read this book. And I look at it and I go, maybe sometime when I'm really in the mood for that, but like not right now.
Yeah, see, that's all the pressure built up of like, because if you get it wrong, like I've received some gifts like from family members that I'm like, you don't know a thing about me. You don't know who I am. I can't remember what we're talking about because I'm so wrapped up in my own angst about this subject. What makes a great gift? Money.
Corene, can I ask you a follow-up question? What would you want in a gift? Like, what should people be thinking about when they want to pick out a great gift for you? Not you getting one for someone else.
I've been told that I'm a very hard person to buy gifts for by people who know me quite well, because if I want something, I'll usually just go and get it. So stationery is well, but no, that's not true, because if they get me the wrong pen in the wrong color with the wrong nib, then they clearly like don't love me at all. Best thing to do is just ask me.
Wonderful. I mean, this is why it's an existential question. It's supposed to cause a little bit of dread. What about you, Sadie and Virginia? What makes a great gift?
See, I'm big on, and this makes it really difficult, but I'm big on like trying to learn about someone and get them like the perfect surprise gift that they would never expect somebody to get for them, but that they're like, oh my gosh, this is me in a gift. And I'm not always successful. I am definitely not always. I will say though, that one of my biggest points of pride is that Corene still wears that scarf that I gave her the very first year I worked at the library. Just going to put that out there.
You did great.
Never again have I reached that level of success, but you know what? I don't care. But yeah, like I'm big, and I always appreciate kind of when someone is able to pin that for me as well. Like, oh, this is something that I didn't have to ask you about. I just kind of felt like this was something that you would like. I do think that I'm relatively easy to shop for, because you get me tea, you get me chocolate, you get me book stuff, and that's pretty much what I need and what I want. Like that's what makes me happy. But yeah, I think that there's something to be said for knowing a person and learning enough about a person to be able to kind of know this is what you would like. I always, when I shop for specifically for Tyler for Christmas, I always try to give like at least one that's like that, because we'll always ask each other. We'll always give the list and say, okay, what do you want this year? What's it going to be? But I'll always try to come up with at least one that he didn't mention, but that I just think that they would enjoy. But as Corene says, it's not easy. It's one of the hardest things in the entire world to ever do. And I am not always successful. I'm very rarely successful, but
it's so hard. It's so hard.
It is.
Because again, you do want to say, like, if you're walking in a shop and you buy something and then you're like, oh, this is you in like physical form. But I usually do that, just not on people's birthdays. And then the birthday comes and there's all that added pressure of it's like Christmas, and then I buy them like 15 gifts and I'm one of these, surely.
My problem is I'm really great at thinking of gifts for people like 6 months ahead of their birthday or something. And I make a mental note like, oh, I should totally remember that. I should totally get that for their birthday. And then I immediately forget what the list is. So like when the actual birthday rolls around, I'm like, I have nothing. Sadie, I'm kind of like you in that I have enough niche little interests that like if you get me something haiku related, if you get me something kind of funny with cats on it, like I'll probably like it. But at the same time, like not, are you making a list? My birthday's coming up. But like some people don't know exactly what my taste is. So like with books, I usually say like, give me what your favorite book is. But usually then I still don't end up with something that I actually like. But if it's like, oh, these are all the Yona of the Dawn manga that are missing from my collection, or like my brother can give me manga and then I'll read it because he has good manga taste. But yeah, I can be kind of picky sometimes though. Virginia, what makes a great gift?
I think it's sort of the same thing. Like, you try, right? It's super stressful. So you try to personalize it. You try to make it like, something that you think the person would like. And what my issue is always, if I'm organized enough, and occasionally I am, once I see it, I'll get it early, right? Like I'll be like, okay. I mean, these days it's a little easier because there's online shopping. So like you order it at a time. I used to have to go around and hunt for it, but like now you can order it on time. But then for that 3 months, I'm like, is this the right thing? That's what I worry about. Like so like I'd be holding on to these gifts that I ordered. Like I thought I was so organized, order ahead of time. Like, oh no, but what if they hate it? And then I would do the same, and I would be like, okay, well, I would just add this other thing to it because maybe this would be like, and you just like, you just keep adding it to it. And then like by the end of it, you're just like, oh no, like, will they still want this? Like, because I will have got it maybe sometimes too early. What if like I suddenly within those 3 minutes find out that like, you know what, maybe they don't actually want this anymore. The other thing I think I attempt to do is to try to do something homemade for people. But then I also worry very much that like I'm just giving junk to people. I worry a lot about that because I'm just like, oh Lord, what is this? What is this that I'm giving to people? So then I also don't want to pile up garbage in people's houses. So then I'm like, so it's like the worst thing to do when you have to find a thing for somebody. So I mean, Corene is not wrong. Ask them. But like also like what Sadie said, like I also do the same thing. I'm trying to be a surprise. You also want to be a surprise. So it's anyway, you can win. You can win. It's the worst.
What about a perfect gift for you, Virginia? And I'm gonna like take some notes as you're answering.
I don't think there's anything.
There's not?
Right? No, there isn't really.
A bag of coffee beans from Grounds for Coffee.
Sure. I mean, it's all about like it's about like that the fact that they think about it, right? Like I mean, that's good enough for me. Like it doesn't.
Respectable answer. Thank you guys for humoring me. I mean, the existential question is supposed to be existential, so I think we succeeded in achieving that today.
I just want to put a little bit of a brag in for myself. The most effective gift that I've ever given for my sister's 40th birthday, I searched out 40 items that would make her happy, and I was so proud of myself for that.
I did that, and it was for my husband's, and it was just before the pandemic hit. I've just collected 40 things just before that, and so like for 40 days he gets something because like I wasn't able to go out.
That's love. Bravo.
40 like really silly things. They're not like special things. They're just like a candy bar.
Oh yeah, a couple of my sisters were like bags of chips. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
I'm gonna steal that idea. That's actually genius. I never thought of that. Alrighty. What book has been gifted to you, Corene? And who gave it to you?
I am like so filled with anxiety right now. I can even talk. Because not only do I have a hard time gift giving, I have a horrible time remembering people's birthdays. It's like two of my like big stressors. So I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, so like apologies to Ursula Vernon if I kind of stumble through this because I've got like adrenaline coursing through my body right now. I'm like, am I currently forgetting someone's birthday? I feel like I am. Oh, okay. And like this is a bit of a cheat because not a lot of people give me gifts of books. And I think that is just a truth. I kind of looked through my bookshelf and I was like, surely at some point someone has given me a gift of a book. And I was like, oh, no, they haven't. And that's fair enough. And I think that's because I buy a lot of books. And so they're not sure what I own or what I don't own. And to kind of spend some time creepily looking through the shelves in my bedroom would be a bit invasive. So people usually kind of hedge their bets and don't give books as gifts. But technically, my roommate did give me this book to read it, very much under the assumption that I would give it back at some point. But we'll see about that. Again, never, ever loan me books. It's just a mistake. It's a horrible mistake. But she knows where I live, so I'm sure she can just go in and retrieve it when she needs it back. So this is a perfect little novella, Thornhedge, by T. Kingfisher, who goes by many names, including Ursula Vernon, which I believe is her real name, but that could be sketchy because I can never quite keep them straight. I have known of Ursula Vernon since LiveJournal days, so drink that in as a salute to the past. She is a Ursa Major Award winner, Hugo Award winner, Nebula Award winner, Mythopedica winner. Under T. Kingfisher, she has published a number of fantasy novels, a number of horror novels that I know Virginia doesn't like, but I really liked. And she also publishes a number of very wonderful children's books under the name Ursula Vernon, which I think are just tops. And so this is, of course, one of our favorite publishers, Tor, coming out with, again, perfect little novellas from amazing authors. I had meant to pick this one up and just never did. And then my roommate dropped it off in my room and was like, read this. And I was like, sure. And then I never did until it was 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, oh, snap, I got to get on this. So thankfully, it was a beautiful little novella. And I was really glad that I did read it. So this is a story about Toadling. And she is returning to the human world. So she was born a long, long time ago for her, but not so very long for the human world. She was kidnapped from her cradle hours after her birth by the fairies. Usually, when children are born, they are protected by iron and little charms to ward away the fair folk. But due to her mother's sickness after her birth, she was not. And so she was kidnapped from her cradle and replaced with a changeling child. Unlike many that are taken and replaced for the whims of the fair folks to play their little tricks on humans, totaling is given to the green teeth, who are kind of swamp spirits who devour unwary swimmers. Boy children, they eat. Girl children, they occasionally keep. And so she is very lucky to be taken in as one of their members and raised among the green teeth, taught their ways and their magic, and she eventually learns to transform herself into the very comforting shape of a toad. And honestly, the way that T. Kingfisher writes about a toad, it honestly sounds pretty great. Just kind of get to wallow a little bit in the mud. Very comforting. However, her blissful time in the swamp is interrupted when the god of the hares comes. She is needed. She is taken away from her swamp to be trained by the fairy folk because she has a mission. She has to return to the land of the humans and, with her magic, deliver a curse. Because the changeling child is coming of age. While Toadling has grown and learned in the land of the fairy folk, the time for the humans has been slow. The changeling that was left in her place is about to be christened. And so she must go there for the protection of the humans, because changeling children are not like them. They are fey, cruel, and care for nothing. The child is a danger. And so the hare god wants to protect the humans by sending Toadling out to deliver a curse, a binding on this child. She must step forward in front of the christening and tell the changeling child, "You will do no harm to those around you." However, when Toadling comes into the church to deliver her message, her mother steps forward. Her mother, who is still sick from giving birth to her, stumbles forward to try and protect her child, or what she thinks is her child. Toadling steps up and tries to explain to her mother what she is there to do. So instead of delivering the message, "You will do no harm to those around you," she instead speaks the words, "I've come to stop her doing harm." The magic is done. There's no going back. And so Toadling decides to stay and protect the people from the child, to protect the people from Fayette, an impossible task, a horrible task, because Fayette is a changeling and they are not like other children. They are cruel and care for nothing. And so Toadling must make a horrible choice. And as a mercy, she forces the child to sleep. If she is sleeping, she cannot hurt people. And so, with the help of the townspeople, she builds a strong tower around the sleeping child, and thorns as sharp as a sword grow around it. And for years and years and years, Toadling guards the sleeping child until a young knight, Halim, is brought to the Thornhedge by a story, a beautiful story of a maiden sleeping away in a tower guarded by a horrible, cruel fairy. And so Toadling needs to teach him, needs to make him learn that not all curses should be broken. So this is, of course, a retelling of Sleeping Beauty. Again, I love what Ursula Vernon does with fairy tales, and that she takes a very specific bent on them or a specific view on them and just retells them in a wonderful way with really fantastic prose and really wonderful characters. Poor Toadling. Poor human Toadling. this is kind of situated in a quasi-medievally history and is kind of a meditation on guilt, on grief, on being an outsider. Because Toadling is both human and not human, and fae and not fae, she doesn't quite belong anywhere in the same way that the changeling doesn't belong anywhere either. There's a little bit of like sweet romance in it. And I've always been kind of fascinated by the idea of changelings. When I grew up, we had this very bizarre book called The Book of Charms and Changeling by Ruth Manning Sanders, who was like an English folklorist, a collection of these like very strange stories with these illustrations that haunt me to this day. And the idea of a changeling is so interesting. The idea that you have this perfect child that at one point is kind of replaced with something different or other that isn't your child anymore. And you can kind of see that idea can pull from so many things. So the kind of like parental anxiety of like, is this mine? Is this not mine? This child isn't exactly what I think. In the story, Fayette, who's the changeling child, is very much like of the Fae, kind of like a psychopath in the story. But the idea, like historical pulling on changelings, has come from maybe many different places. Folklorists think it might have something to do with, like colonialism. So, if your child is sick and unhealthy, you just steal it from someone else and replace it. Several people have said that this might be kind of like early depictions of autism. So you have a child who is very different from the others. So the idea of a changeling is so interesting. And I think that's why I really enjoyed a lot of this book. It doesn't kind of tackle any of those subjects, but I think it's just kind of like an interesting addition or look at the Sleeping Beauty myth, in that a lot of these fairy tales are kind of looking from like the villain's point of view now and kind of retelling them in that way. And I think she does something very interesting in that. And that kind of like the guilt that she feels for having done not exactly her task, and how long and how lonely she is kind of caretaking over this person. So with a lot of Tor novellas, I know that Virginia and I love to complain about this, is that they are not long enough and that they do all this fantastic world building and you're like, awesome. And why isn't this 300 pages long? Like, you're just giving me like a little taste, a little teaser. And what I think T. Kingfisher is really good at is that this is exactly as long as it needs to be. I don't feel like there's anything more to say. Beginning, middle, end, enough world building that I got it. I don't feel like I need any more. It's good. It's just good where it is. And so that was very refreshing at 6:30 in the morning. So yeah, if you are looking for another fairy tale retelling that's nice and very short. So yeah, thanks to Ari for lending this to me. And I'm definitely going to return it tonight. That's what's going to happen.
That sounds so fun. Can I ask how long the book is?
You may, not that this is like a competition, but it was a whacking 111 pages.
Nice and quick. I love that. Cute little hour-long morning read. Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Corene. And then we have one left. Virginia, what book do you have and who gifted it to you?
Well, choosing a book for Keep It Fictional has never been easier. There was no agonizing involved this week because I have exactly one book that fits this category completely. Unlike all my book friends here, I don't get books from people because like my family doesn't read. My husband does, but like we read very different things. And he knows that he should not attempt to try to understand whatever the weird stuff I am reading. In fact, when I was telling him about this book and why I got it, you can just see his eyes just glaze over at some point, and he's just like, you know what? I'm just going to stop listening right now. The same look that Corene is going to give me in about 5 minutes, probably. It's also not a good idea to give me books because, like, I know some people love it. Like when like people say, oh, this is the best book. You should read it. Or like my book friend just said earlier, oh, give me your favorite book, right? I don't do well with recommendations, as you all know. I need to pick books on my own terms. My bookshelves are full of books that other people pay for because I get a lot of gift cards. They know this is a safe thing to give me. Just give her a gift card to a bookstore and that would be good. Or I will like put a card together and I'll just get someone to symbolically tap that submit your order button. And that's how I get book gifts. So technically they're gifts, right? Like, anyway, I was all ready to justify it. But a couple months ago, a very kind person actually gifted me a physical book. So I do have a book to talk about. Now, granted that this is a book the person knows I have read already. I've interlibrary loaned it and he knows I loved it. But I didn't pick the book myself. So I feel like it's truly a gift because I didn't know what he was going to get me. I didn't know that he was getting a gift. And also, I think he knows that I'll read whatever he tells me to read. He's the one exception. I do take recommendations from him. I trust his reading taste. And he knows my reading well enough. He knows my brand of nonsense that he's not going to give out like suggestions lightly. So yes, I have the only book I have ever received that I didn't pick up for myself is Beyond the Curve by Kobo Abe, collection of short story translated by Juliet Winters Carpenter. And as some of my book friends probably guess, this is from Mark, one of our former Keep It Fictional librarians. So Mark and I have alluded to Kobo Abe on the show, but we haven't talked about his book at length. And I don't know where Kobo Abe ranks in Mark's list of authors. Probably not as high as Calvino. And just keeping my promise here to mention Calvino's name as often as I can. But I think he has a copy of this book, so I'm assuming he likes it enough. And the reason why I interlibrary loaned it was because one of my reading goals is to read as many winners of the Akutagawa Prize as possible this year. The Akutagawa Prize is one of the most prestigious literary awards in Japan. And the story that won Kobo Abe's award is included and translated in this collection. Sort of. Because the book only contains an excerpt of the story. I would love to sit down with the translator Juliet Winters Carpenter and ask why. Why not the whole thing? Why don't you just finish the translation? Why just give me an excerpt? That doesn't make any sense. Now I have to learn enough Japanese so that I can read, and finish the story myself. It's a good incentive, but come on, why? Anyway, so the stories in this collection, I feel like is a really good starting point for anyone who wants to know what Kobo Abe's writing is like. He's mostly compared to Kafka, so you can see sort of that kind of stories. And his characters, like many of them in this collection, they all live a really like ordinary life, but then until something happens, they get stuck into this situation, which they often made worse because they just think themselves into this spiral and it just goes farther and farther into the labyrinth and they just can't get out of it. And sometimes maybe just a little bit too active of an imagination. And it seems very illogical at points. I think for some readers, they'll be like, why don't you just do that? But like that doesn't seem to be a way out. And you just keep walking farther and farther until you find yourself completely stuck and lost. And I think the first story in the collection really exemplifies this theme. Main character A, and most of his characters never given the full name. So A is coming home. And when he opens the door to his apartment, he notices he has a guest. A dead one. A body was lying on the floor. Now, normally, if you find that in your apartment, you probably back out of your apartment right away and report this to the cops or something that you found a dead body. But A didn't do that. He closes the door. And as A pointed out, once you close the door, there is only one thing left to do. Lock it. And then as he was trying to figure out and making sure, I don't know this person. This is not somebody that I know. It's just a random dead body in my room. He's trying to figure out, okay, what do I do now? I think I need to get rid of this body somehow. And then he started thinking, well, should I turn on the light? Should I turn off the light? What's better? Should I let the neighbors know that I'm home? Like, is that a good thing? Can they smell this? Can someone else smell the corpse? How do I get rid of this without anybody knowing? Maybe I can just pretend that I'm helping a very drunk friend going home and I can just dispose the body somewhere else. Where's the killer who has murdered this person? Why is he dumping this body in my apartment? Are they watching me right now? Maybe they're watching me right now. Wait, what if somebody else in the building found this body first in their apartment and they're just passing this along like a hot potato? Maybe it has already made the rounds. Maybe someone else is watching me right now and found the body. And so just on, and A has just absolutely no idea what to do next. A very similar story is called The Intruder. That one is called The Irrelevant Death. And the other story is called Intruders, another one of my favorite. In the middle of the night, our narrator was woken up by a knock on his door. And when he went to open the door, a family was out there. Grandparents, parents, kids, a whole big family. And they walk right in. And they start making themselves comfortable. Our narrator doesn't know them. He's like, what are you doing in my house? And they said, I think this is our house now. And he's like, no, it's not. It's my house. What are you doing here? Get out of here. They said, why don't we put it to a vote? Put up your hand if you think this is our house. And of course, everyone except our narrator puts up their hands. Well, there you have it. Majority rules. This is now our house. We are hungry. Why don't you go make us some food? And that is how this random family completely took over his home and his life. And every time our narrator protests, they will say, well, let's put it to a vote. And of course, the Akutagawa Prize-winning story, The Crimes of S. Karma, my absolute favorite in the collection, even if it is not complete, is about a man who woke up one day and he can't remember his name. For the life of him, he just can't think of what his name is. The alarm clock went off. He's supposed to go to work, and that much he knows. He knows where he works, and he knows how to get there. And so he thinks, that's okay, because I'm sure it will come back to me. And if not, when I get to the office, I am sure something there will have my name on it, like my nameplate on the desk or something, on the door. I will find my name. That's fine. Just go to work and then it'll be okay. And so he got dressed and he was about to leave. He was going to grab his briefcase and he realized his briefcase is missing. And he's like, okay, that's weird. I guess I might have left it at work. That's fine. Once I get to work, everything will be okay. So he got to work, and as he was walking up to where his office is, and he still remembered that, he saw on the door is his name, S. Karma. And he was like, oh, that is my name. Doesn't sound familiar, but okay, that is my name. But as he was approaching the door, he realized that someone else is already sitting in his chair. Not only that, someone else looks exactly like him. He is sitting in his chair. And he was talking to one of his colleagues. Of course, they didn't suspect anything. They think that, oh, this is S. Karma. This is the person. But as he was trying to peek in, like, what is going on? He realized that if he turned his head at just the right angle, he can see that this is not him. It's not actually him. It is actually his business card. His business card is impersonating him sitting there. And for some reason, if you look at it just at that right angle, you will see it's just a business card. His business card sitting there in the chair. You can imagine Corene is just loudly protesting here. The excerpt ends with him trying to be like, okay, now what? Now what do I do if nobody can see that it is just my business card sitting in the chair? Anyway, well, Kobo Abe stories and novels, as you can imagine, is for all readers who love the absurdity, the surrealism of it all, who just relishes that feeling that something creepy is lurking around the corner and is staring right at you. Kobo Abe plays a lot with the idea of transformation, very often like inexplicable transformation. I won't explain the other story because I don't want Corene to faint. It's about people losing their identity, losing their memory, not being able to connect the past and the present. And it's a lot about being an outsider to society. That's what a lot of his stories is about. And there's so much strangeness and so much weirdness. I just love his work so much. As one of the characters said in the book, just because I imagine it doesn't mean I shouldn't give it weight. And that's a lot of like sort of stories like that. So thank you, Mark, for your gifts. I know this is an older book and it's published more than 30 years ago, so it was hard to find. I know you have to order it online, one of your fancy sources. So thank you for this. I will cherish this forever. I will take it out and reread. You're a good book friend. Thank you for all the book chats and tolerating my randomness, unlike some people here. So thank you.
I've decided that I will read anything that Virginia recommends to me after that. That was fantastic. I had to look through a list of winners of the Akutagawa Prize. I don't think I've actually read any of them, but now I'm going to start paying attention because that book sounded super fun. And you guys all know that I love Japanese lit. So I'll add that to my reading list for the future. Well, thank you all for sharing your wonderful gifted books with us today, whether or not it was gifted to you by someone who really knows your reading taste, someone who doesn't really know your reading taste. But it felt like we all kind of had winners here. We all had books that we all kind of connected with in one way or another. So that was really nice. And I hope to our listeners that they're able to get some inspiration for book gifts to give in the future, or book gifts that they can ask for in the future. Yeah, and that's all we've got for today. So thank you, book friends, for joining us, and we will see you next week at Keep It Fictional.
Emma, you forgot to say you are the gift, dear listeners.
Well, we can add that little tidbit at the end. Thank you, listeners, for listening to us.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please tell a fellow book lover about it. You can find a list of all the books we discussed in our show notes. Join us next week for another fun book chat. Until then, keep it fictional.